Welcome, everybody. In case you are new to ARC, and I know one or two of you will be, we are we're a movement really that is about broad excellence, including science and the arts and physical development. We are about equity, we are about inclusion, we are about well being, we are about democracy, and we are about human rights. These are the things we stand for. These are the things we value. These are the things that bring us together. And this is what we are trying to promote within the world. I'll say later, but I'll say it right now at the beginning. I think it's important that we're moving from a world being run by old men to a world being run by bold women, and and we will see that particularly in the field of economics, which I'm going to come on to during this presentation. You'll see behind me a picture it's a painting by one of our favorite artists, my wife and I. His name is Jeremy Brown. I'm not promoting him. He doesn't give me a commission. But Jeremy Brown specializes in pictures, paintings of a bleak midwinter with sparse homesteads, and in the corner of every one is a little light that, in a way, is a symbol of hope and the warmth and the light to come, even in the midst of the sparse bleakness that we experience. And I think in many ways this is where we are now with COVID-19. We're experiencing COVID-19 in lots of different ways. Some of you have got your children full-time at school for quite some time. Some of you have your children just going back. Some of you have some of your children going back, and others of your children staying at home. Our experiences vary. But what I want to address today with you is whatever those experiences are or have been, what we're learning from them will last years ahead. And what we're learning is not something we should simply wait for to come to us, but what we're learning is something that we should define here individually and collectively, and take forward in a battle for the future and the souls of our young people and the next generation. So I want to talk with you, share this half an hour about three themes that arise from our agenda in this virtual summit of equity, well-being, inclusion, and innovation. And there could never be a more critical time when light has been shone on these issues most boldly and sometimes most harshly than probably at any time before. Let's begin by thinking about this in a slightly satirical way. There is a comedy website called McSweeney's website, and this website produced a fake back to school letter from the school board to parents, outlining what the arrangements might be. This assumed that it was a place where some people would go back to school immediately, some people would not. There might be some kind of choice. It's meant to be satirical, but some people responded and said it actually wasn't true enough. You'll make up your own mind. This is what McSweeney said. So in the fake survey that it sent to parents, it began by saying, so this fall you favor one, in-person learning and constant fear, or perhaps two, hybrid learning, mixing constant fear with a dollop of logistical chaos, or perhaps it's three, remote learning, marrying logistical chaos with the cold cloak of devastating isolation. Or perhaps you don't want any of these. You give it all up and you move to Maine and launch your own homeschool, which is actually what is happening now in some ways within Ottawa in Canada, where lots of people who can, obviously the more privileged, are setting up their own little learning pods with 3 or 4 families, hiring a part-time teacher to work with them, sharing the costs and so on. But what this in a way summarizes is how challenging the situation has been for people in many cases. Um, here's a letter early on in the pandemic in the Ottawa Citizen from 2 professors actually who were writing about their own children. They'd actually looked up the salary of the teacher who taught their kids because it's on a government website. It's over $100,000, and wondered why on earth the teacher wasn't contacting them. Why on earth the teacher wasn't teaching online? Why on earth they'd not already connected? But in some cases, we're finding in Canada and elsewhere, when governments and unions are not able to work together compared to places that are. There have been many bureaucratic interferences with giving teachers permission to be the first responders in reacting to their students. So while some parents have been feeling this, we've had teachers feeling incredibly frustrated in trying to make contact with students, in now in teaching online, which may not be the best hand in their deck, to be absolutely honest. While now they've got in Canada here and in the United States, everybody watching them. Teaching is a profession where parents typically don't watch teachers. For the first time in their lives, many teachers are now having parents watch them while they're teaching, and while they're teaching in a way that they don't necessarily particularly want to teach. Today is my own grandchildren's first day of virtual school, and we've been receiving communications from their teacher. And you can see the stress written all over the teacher's face as they're trying to manage this complex website and introduce 6-year-olds or 9-year-olds to it over time. But the good news is in all this, that as teachers and leaders have been facing new situations practically every day, as they're experiencing what Steve in his book calls imperfect leadership, feeling out of your depth day after day after day. They have turned to each other. And this is a survey from the Alberta Teachers Association, but there are many elsewhere showing how much more collaboration there's actually been among teachers as a result of COVID-19, something that we should think, hope, and expect will and must continue once COVID-19 is over. So today is about equity. This opening talk is about equity. This is my memoir, Moving, a shameless plug with tiny print underneath, forward by Nicola Sturgeon. So I hope you'll buy it just for that, because this is the literary masterpiece of the whole thing. And what the book argues, based on my own narrative of the struggle for social mobility in the 1960s and 70s, is that many people see social mobility, the chance to move up despite adversity in your home circumstances, as an alternative to equity. But since the 1970s, social mobility everywhere has been considerably in decline over 4 decades. We'll see why shortly. Social mobility was invented by this man, Petrim Sorokin, a Russian exile who moved to America in the 1920s, worked at the University of Chicago, and then founded the sociology department at Harvard University. He invented the concept of social mobility. He was an exile from communism, bear in mind. And Sorokin talked about 2 kinds of social mobility. One is, let's presume there are inequities. We know in almost every society there are some degrees of inequity, but these are greater or lesser. Some are richer and poorer. Some are filthy rich and dirt poor because they're more extreme. But he saw what we saw, which is social mobility is often the movement of individuals across the strata, up and down. But he also pointed out that social mobility is about the movement of the layers closer. So the layers may be far apart, or the layers may be closer to each other. And this is what we have to pay attention to also as we understand why social mobility has been in decline, because the layers have been moving further apart. And I'll talk about this in a few minutes. In other words, we need to grasp that social mobility is often seen as an alternative to equity, but rather, actually, as I mentioned at the last summit, social mobility is the consequence of equity. So it's the quest for equity that should really drive us more than the quest for social mobility, because in a way, social mobility will look after itself if we start to get more equity. But what we've been facing is in a way the opposite of equity. Over the last 4 decades, we've been experiencing inequity, and that has been most stark and most palpable during the pandemic. And it will be a huge issue that all of us will face with our finance ministers, with our leaders, with our business communities after the pandemic. And this is what I want to talk about as one of three circles of, not of hell, but three circles of a challenge within the next few years, within all our educational policies. Because I think in the last 4 decades, what we've seen is a world where schools have actually been getting better. We've known more about how to improve. We've known more about how to collect data. We've known more about how to monitor it. Thanks to Beatrice, we're learning more about how to implement policies through the advice of people like OECD. We know more about cooperative learning, cultural responsive teaching, positive behavior management. We know so much more than we used to. But the problem is the schools are getting better, but the world is getting worse. And we somehow have to start addressing these two things together, not as good schools as an alternative to a bad world, but good schools connected with a policy for a better world. So this is the way that Dennis Shirley and I describe it in our upcoming book early next year with ASCD on well-being and socio-emotional learning. What I'm going to say to you now is that actually austerity is the other side of growth. And both of them are a corrupted coinage. Austerity and growth are a corrupted coinage as the drivers of where society should be moving. And this quote is a way to try and tie that idea together, that economic inequality is the milled edge of rough justice, the two sides of the coin that welds growth and austerity together. What I'm going to ask you to do in the next few months is to spend a lot of time becoming specialists in economics. Read a lot about economics. People like John Swinney, I know you've cut your teeth in economics. I want you to forget everything you've learned about economics in the last 40 years, because there's a new economics emerging, and it is not about growth. It is not about austerity. It is about quality of life. Which also leads to greater growth. Let's see what that looks like. A lot of the new economists who are talking about this are bold women, not old men. Mariana Mazzucato is a prize-winning UK-based author of The Value of Everything. And she talks, as all these other economists I'm going to put before you do, about how traditional economics of the last 40 years, which separated itself from politics and social science in order to create a fake mathematical understanding of economics that was apparently value neutral, has an intellectually impoverished idea of economics based on price, scarcity, and preferences. We should beware, she says, of renewed austerity to reduce the enormous debt to gross domestic product ratios. And she points to the enormous amount of wealth that is wrapped up in companies like Apple that have billions of dollars outside their own nation, equivalent to the GDPs of major European economies that are exempt from tax because they move them somewhere else. Economics for 40 years has been driven by growth to create income, which can be taxed to create possible revenue to move into public spending. But the greatest source of possible public spending revenue, says Mazzucato and everyone else I'm going to lay before you, is not in income, it is in wealth. And it is wealth that we need to be addressing. The wealth that put the big five of the major tech companies in front of Congress a few weeks ago. The wealth that Bernie Sanders has put a co-authored bill in front of Congress saying that during the pandemic, the billionaires have on average increased their wealth by 1/3 just during the pandemic. And therefore there should be a one-time tax of around 60% on the wealth that the tech companies like Amazon, Apple, and the others have made during the pandemic. It's wealth, not income, that we need to think about. This is Kate Raworth. I've got 5 of these people I'm going to put before you. She's also British-based and has written the prize-winning book, A Donut Economics. She talks about we've been fixated on income and growth. And during this time, we've actually seen inequity increase as a consequence of this policy, because it's at increased wealth for the 1% and the 0.1%. But the people at the bottom, although they may be mainly working, have not increased their average wealth or assets or income at all. It's not about making economies grow, she says. It's about the quality of life that we pursue that is the most important. And then there's Heather Bushey. If you've never heard of Heather Bushey, Heather Bushey is the economic advisor to Joe Biden as he's running for the next election. She is driven by the sizable gaps in wealth between rich and poor, and the fact that this blocks the flow of ideas, of innovation, of capital, because it's restricting the ability and the talents of those who cannot move up and forward. So it is not only increasing inequity, but it is actually restricting our capacity for growth and development. And her signal case, and this is for you, Young, is Kansas in 2007, 2008, where Governor Brownback introduced, in the midst of plenty, swinging austerity cuts in order to cut taxes for the wealthy, and to do that by cutting public expenditure. Between 2007 and 2017, as a consequence of these austerity measures, Kansas moved from being above average in educational achievement in grade 4 literacy and maths to being in the bottom 25% of states in America as a direct consequence of the impact that the austerity measures had on public education, equal funding for public schools, the cost of kindergarten, the availability of quality teachers, and so on. So pay attention to Heather Bushey, because she is Joe Biden's advisor, and a lot of what she's saying, she's also saying is now being discussed by people like the IMF, that growth and austerity are no longer the major things to focus on. And then take Robert Reich. Robert Reich is the former advisor for Labor for Bill Clinton. And Reich talks, you can see here, it's a snake oil. You cannot save the economy by killing it. And what Reich tells us is this, that effectively, the choice now is not between Republicans and Democrats, Labour and Conservative. The choice is between oligarchy, which is the rule of the powerful, over democracy. Oligarchy, he says, occurs when you focus on short-term shareholder value, not long-term stakeholder value. When you increase executive pay to multiples of hundreds over the lowest pay in a company, where many major companies now run by billionaires pay zero taxes by moving out of the country, tax avoidance and so on, where unionized workers are replaced by contract workers who now have to work 2 or 3 jobs in order just to get by, where large companies run by billionaires get government bailouts if they, so we take the risk, not they take the risk if they fail because they're deemed too big to fail, where they use a lot of the money to lobby people in politics so that your ministers and your prime ministers hear more and more on their phones from the wealthy and less from the ordinary people, where instead of taxes, they build publicly subsidized foundations that then are donated to the causes that they prefer, not necessarily those that serve the public good. And where through TED Talks, as we'll see, they even influence the kind of thought leadership at places like Aspen, Davos, and TED Talks that actually shift our ideas about what we think is important politically and socially. And last here in Canada is our finance minister and deputy prime minister, Chrystia Freeland, who in a brilliant book in 2012, Plutocrats, talked about how the meritocrats, the dot-com millionaires who did actually build their own wealth, they weren't given it, are now turning into aristocrats, a kind of rentier elite who prevent others from gaining the wealth that they accumulated. They do this through philanthropic causes. They do this through legacy donations to universities that then secure places for their own children. And it's manifested in COVID rule breaking. Alan Sugar having to going to Australia without going into quarantine. A major billionaire from Wisconsin coming to Canada without having to go into quarantine. Boris Johnson's leading advisor, Dominic Cummings, driving wherever he wants in the country without going into proper quarantine. A rule for them that is different than a rule for everybody else. And in Winners Take All, and Jared Harad talks about how this applies even to the direction that foundations take, the topics for TED Talks, and the focus they have. And one thing to watch out for is in TED Talks and with philanthropies, it's okay to talk about poverty because you can address poverty through charity. It is not okay to talk about inequality because inequality means the wealthy giving something up in order that the disadvantaged can get something greater. So what I'm asking you to do here in the next few years, the next few weeks and months, is to G yourself up on economics so that you can argue on equal terms with your finance ministers, your prime ministers, and your other leaders. Because the opposite to this is not just GDP, but it is quality of life. Here are leaders you'll recognize from New Zealand, from Denmark, from Iceland, from Scotland, and the finance minister of Canada, who are all behind this together as a movement, not just as a set of opinions, but as a movement. And prosperity doesn't just mean financial prosperity. It means in its original definition of prosperous, which is quality of life, quality of experience, fulfillment in life. Here's Nicola Sturgeon talking about it, that our collective well-being should be the major goal of economic policy. And I am in meetings now with, for instance, the International the Inter-American Development Bank. I met with their executive 2 weeks ago. I'm in a meeting with the World Bank on Monday, about 20 of us, with Michelle Bachelet, the person in the UN responsible for human rights. And they are arguing that even if there is austerity, education, public education, mass education must be a protected zone in order that this does not harm our children now and the future economic benefit that will come from them in the future. That is the first and the biggest thing. I have a second, a shorter thing, and a tiny tail at the end. You'll hear a lot of people now saying that the second thing we must deal with, the new normal, should be blended and hybrid technology. You'll hear people like Bill Gates saying that we should think about schools without walls. Why do we need walls? Why do we need physical schools? It is utterly bizarre how the greatest challenge we've had during COVID-19, that of technology, should be conceived as the greatest solution after COVID-19. So if this is the challenge, what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is, this is a slide that Beatrice Pont uses from Thales 2018. Actually, first of all, a lot of teachers are already using technology with their students. You look where you are on here. Only England, out of the member countries of ARC, actually falls behind 50% use of technology amongst their students. We have more of a platform than we already thought we did. Technology is already being used, and sometimes it's being used well. So if we don't want blended or hybrid, because all these are, they're statements about delivery, they're not statements about outcomes, impact, and quality. If we don't want blended or hybrid, what is it that we do want? And the best term I can come up with at the moment is this term of balanced technology. We might think of it as optimum technology or maximum quality technology. This involves judgments not about how much, but it involves judgments about how well we use technology in relation to teaching. And as a sense of what this looks like in practice, I now want to show you something that a new center I've just established with colleagues at the University of Ottawa has set out as a charter for technology and education for the future, a 10-point charter. So with a group of fantastic colleagues at the University of Ottawa, we have established this center for Shaneen. Shaneen stands for Change, Engagement and Innovation in Education. And we have a 10-point charter that really deals with the yin and the yang of technology. This is coming up on our website within the next couple of days. So you're getting, remember this is Chatham House rules, so don't circulate this to anybody. So you're getting a sneak peek of what this actually looks like. What does Shaneen believe? What do we believe at Shaneen? First is there will always need to be physical schools and teaching. Because this is where children get taught by certified, qualified experts, because schools are where we make friends. Schools are places where we learn about things like racism, and we build things like community and democracy. And schools are places for children to go so their parents can go to work. So let's not talk about doing away with physical boundaries and physical schools. Second is technology is there to enrich good teaching, but technology can never replace poor quality teaching. It's there to enhance what is already there, not as a substitute for what is already there. Third is technology, as it is in Uruguay, must be public, universal, and free. It can't be anytime, anywhere, if you want, if you have the resources, whether you like, but it must be outside of school, public, universal, and free for everyone. Fourth, we must use technology when it has a unique value proposition. when it offers something that cannot be offered in any other way or to the same degree of quality. Connecting teachers across rural schools, we've learned through COVID, is one of these. Providing children with special education support with devices that enable them to access and express their learning. Thinking dramatically differently about assessment other than industrialized standardized testing beyond COVID-19 are just three examples of where it might make a difference. Fifth is not disruptive innovation that throws devices into schools and classrooms willy-nilly, leaving teachers and kids to struggle, right or wrong, and possibly sacrificing whole cohorts of classes while they figure this out, but making all use of technology evidence-informed, inquiry-driven, and impact-assessed. Six, that we address the risks, that tech companies address the risks like excess screen time, as well as the benefits, and are transparent, open, and committed about that. Seventh, that technology across different languages, for example, this is a big issue in Canada, being both French and English speaking, cultures and identities, that deliberately figures out how to do that. Eighth, that it enriches teachers' professional judgment, doesn't replace teachers' professional judgment. Ninth, that it is part of a movement to ensure that educational tech companies pay their fair corporate taxes as a public and educational responsibility. And 10, that it has social benefit to improve society. This may sound to you like wild, lefty, ridiculous idealism. But the thing is that in Shanine, we already have technology companies coming to us very interested in this agenda because of us as independent researchers and intellectuals trying to find the money from where technology companies already are. We're actually defining and helping technologies companies figure out where they need to be. And as educators with finance and with tech together, that is what we all need to be doing, is not trying to fit in with where people already are, but actually defining where it is that people need to be. And so last, and this is probably the least of all three, but I just want to raise this briefly with you as well. Instead of bringing back, as many countries are now trying to do, expensive, high stakes, industrial factory age, large scale standardized testing, instead of that, let's start thinking about how we can use technology to transform the assessments that support teachers' professional judgments, to give them back and their students back data in real time about their learning that can be shared with the student, shared with the parents, and shared with colleagues across different grades or subjects, for example, and that will enhance teachers' sense of collective responsibility and collective professional judgment to move their children forward. I think we have a choice in the next few years. We can follow the ball that may be driven by business, by some media, by some national leaders, and some finance ministers to have austerity, to have blended and hybrid technology as a quick fix, and to keep high stakes, traditional factory age, top down accountability. Or together, we can push for prosperity and quality of life, because this doesn't just make sense in terms of equity, but it actually makes sense in terms of economic development as well. Instead of hybrid and blended technology, we can have balanced and optimum technology, exploiting its unique value proposition that will enhance teachers' professional judgment, not replace teachers' professional judgment, and building on the collaboration that has grown during COVID-19 We can start to move beyond top-down accountability, except as the necessary last resort, in favor of evidence-informed, technology-enhanced, but human-grounded professional collective responsibility amongst our teachers and leaders. I hope this is something we can get to in the next 3 days together. I'm very excited to be working with you. I'm most excited to be sitting in on the sessions where we're all working together to think how we move forward, how we define the new normal, and how that new normal will enhance equity, the agenda of the next 4 decades, because it's been undone in the previous 4 decades. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. And I'm so excited to be with you again.